This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 277, Lando. And that's not Lando Calrissian. Welcome to Talking Drupal. As our regular listeners know, we're all Lando users, and today we have the inventor joining us to discuss where Lando is and where it's going. Welcome, Mike Pirog from Tandem. Mike is the CTO and co-founder of Tandem, a development agency that's doing work with current technologies, including Drupal. He's also, as I mentioned, the inventor of Lando. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone out there on the internet. Very exciting to be here at Talking Drupal number 277.
Thanks for joining us. And before we jump into today's topic, I'd like to welcome our normal host, John Picozzi from Oomph. What's new with you this week?
Good afternoon, evening, morning, whenever you're listening to this, internet friends. What's new with me? Just coming off of the holiday break, and I usually put out a pretty extensive Christmas list, but my darling wife always throws it in the garbage, doesn't pay attention to it entirely, and buys me, what she thinks will be cool, fun, or interesting. And this year, I actually got what I'm dubbing a gateway device. Now, I had up until this point very vehemently tried to avoid Amazon or Google devices in my house for no reason other than to just not have to set up another thing, not have to have that another device, right? Well, my wife got me a Sonos One for Christmas, which obviously is a speaker, but it also is Amazon Alexa enabled, and so I enabled it. I was like, we'll give it a try. Much like Steven with his Linux or Raspberry Pi stuff. I was like, we'll tinker. We'll see what happens. So I have a gateway device now. I've started, I've programmed some skills into it, and I've started having conversations with it. It's here in my office, so I can listen to music and podcasts and stuff while I'm working. And overall, it's been interesting. We'll see how it goes. But that's what's going on with me.
I have an Alexa in my office. I've had it for probably 4 or 5 years. I use it every day. Just to listen to switch between radio stations and things like that.
I am enjoying that aspect of it. Yeah. Listening to a lot more classical music and podcasts now, like throughout the day, which is cool because I used to listen to them in the car, but now I'm not in the car. So
very cool. And also joining us as usual is Stephen Cross from Parallax Info Technology. What's new with you this week, Stephen?
Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. This is the first time we're talking since the new year.
Yep.
Yeah. What's new with me? Over the holiday break, I think on one of the December episodes, I mentioned that I had gotten a Pi 400, which is a computer and a keyboard from Raspberry Pi Foundation. So it's basically a Pi 4 inside of a keyboard. So you buy this kit where you get the keyboard and the cables and the mouse, and you just plug it into a monitor or TV. So I played with that quite a bit, and I wrote an article about it and submitted it to the Linux for Everyone magazine, and it was published. So that was kind of fun. So if you want to check it out, Linux for Everyone has a publication on Medium. So if you do like medium.Linux for Everyone, you can find the article there and check it out. So it was kind of fun writing and having an editor go through my post before it went out. So
there's going to be no podcasting with him anymore now that he's a seasoned podcaster and published author.
Oh yes, a published author. It was fun to. So it's a review of is the Pi 400 a reusable desktop computer. So if you read that post, you'll see what I think about that.
Reusable or replacement?
I would say
is it
is it usable? as a desktop computer, I would say it cannot replace probably what you have now, but could be a great second machine or a primary machine for someone who just needs to kind of do things online, check email, browse the internet, go to Facebook. Works perfectly for that. I've been using it exclusively for that for over a month. All my email, all my browsing on it, and it works great. And it's kind of interesting that a little $70 computer can fit all those needs that we have, and we have these big expensive machines, but probably 90% of the stuff we do, unless you're a developer, can be done on this little $70 single board machine. It's kind of crazy.
And also, as usual, I am Nick with Enlightened Development, and this week I was doing something a little bit different. I've been tinkering in my workshop. So one of the things that my wife got me for our anniversary was a woodworking class on furniture making. And one of the gifts that I got for Christmas this year was a saw, so I could finally start taking advantage of some of those lessons. So the first thing that I did, I mentioned cleaning my basement a couple of weeks ago, I think. And the purpose of that was actually to give myself some space so I could start doing some woodworking. And so one of the first things I built was a work table that I could put my table saw on so that I could more safely work rather than having it kind of on the floor or stacked precariously on cinder blocks or something. So, it took me a couple of hours, and it was, there's just something so satisfying about building. It's a rough thing. It's a work table. So it wasn't, a finished piece, but it's something so satisfying about saying like, hey, I need to build this, and it needs to be this tall so that the table saw is at the same height as the other saws, and having it come together, it was pretty enjoyable. I'm looking forward to making some more things and seeing what I come up with.
Hey, those folks over in your house are pretty handy. So you get a handy crew over there, building furniture, doing all kinds of crafts.
Joanna is more crafty. I like more construction stuff. So yeah, we make a good team. And as I mentioned at the top, also joining us this week is Mike Pirog with Tandem. What's new with you this week?
What's new with me this week? Well, where do I begin with all the crazy things I've been doing recently? Let's see. I went to a bunch of bars, then I went to a bunch of restaurants, and it was so fun. And by that, I mean, I've gotten really good at walking between this room and that room, and then the room past that room. So there was a lot of that. That was pretty exciting.
You have each room set up as like a different theme. Like, hey, now I'm in the bar room, and now I'm in the restaurant room.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good idea. I should do that. Although I feel like I might be spending more time in the bar room than I should be. But yeah. So last week I took my small child James out into the woods in New Hampshire here, since the snow has dissipated a little bit, and we saw an owl. That was very exciting. He freaked out because he's only seen cartoon versions of them so far, and to translate that into reality was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. But that's about it for me. I mean, it was nice to have some time off work. That hasn't happened for me in a while. So
is the snow dissipating a sad thing for you, or I mean, you live in New Hampshire, so I'm imagining you like the snow, but are you sick of it yet?
So I don't like the snow. I was living in California for a while, and then we had my wife and I had a kid, so we moved back here to New Hampshire. And I didn't realize I never really loved the winter, but I didn't realize how much I hate it until I stopped having it. And now that I have it again, I realize that I don't really like it. So snow dissipating is a very good thing. If it would dissipate for the rest of my life, that'd be swell. But my wife is Russian and is from Siberia. So the only silver lining that I can find is that it's certainly better to be in winter here than it is there.
Right.
Yeah, -70 is pretty extreme, I imagine.
Yeah, it's quite chilly.
Yeah,
I'm very much in the man, I wish it would snow more camp right now, but that could all change. Anyway,
my daughter recently moved to Phoenix, and she told us a couple of weeks ago, she says, I thought I would miss the seasons and the winter. She says, but I'm really enjoying not putting on a winter coat.
My opinion on that is that people in New England say that, oh, well, I just like the seasons, that's just our coping mechanism because we know that it's better to be in 75 degrees all the time and we're not. So we just make up this excuse for ourselves so we feel better. Oh, the seasons, I miss the seasons. It's like I come back for fall for 2 days and like winter for 2 days and I've got the seasons. I'm good. I don't need the other 60 days of winter. We had a beautiful
Tom Brady
beautiful
said,
fall this year. Beautiful fall this year though.
Like Tom Brady recently said, you won't catch me dead or something living in New England ever again.
Who's Tom Brady?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Who?
So anyway, moving on to our main topic this week, as we mentioned, is Lando. So for those listening, can you give us a quick elevator pitch for what Lando is, Mike? Yeah,
sure. So Lando is a development tool. Its like primary high level objective is to be the only development tool that you need. And the chief design idea behind Lando is that you have a Git repository. It has the code for your application in it. There should be a configuration file inside of it that describes the things that you need for development. So sort of a local development or just generally a development dependency sort of configuration. And the idea is that you should be able to have this file in your repository, Git clone the repository down, run a Lando start. And when Lando start is done, you should have all the things that you need to develop your project. So what I mean by that specifically is you should have all the infrastructure you need to run your project. So for like a Drupal site, that would be at the very least some sort of PHP web server and some sort of database. But it could be more, it could be Elasticsearch, could be some other things. And all the tools that you need to develop your site as well. So that could be Composer and Node and Drush and other things. If you're connecting to an external source, that could be the Acquia CLI or the Platform CLI or Terminus or something like that. And then the other nice thing that Lando does that I think is sort of a bonus is we have integrations with lots of other hosting providers. So when you're developing, you're not developing on an island. You can sort of connect to Acquia or connect to Pantheon and pull your sites down, push things up to that. But that's generally the design idea. And that should be true for all your projects, whether it's Drupal or something else. It should be true regardless of what operating system you're on or whether you're running it in CI/CD. So we're talking about one tool that you can use for all your projects to develop them. And that puts all the magic behind sort of a common interface. So the way that you start project A is not very different than project B. You don't need different tools. Just git clone, Lando start, and you can do your stuff. That's the idea.
So Mike, we're a Drupal podcast, but Lando works with non-Drupal things as well. I'm curious if you can share who is using Lando and what is the breakdown between the technologies that Lando's being used for?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the Drupal space for a long time. Before Tandem, I did a company called Kalamuna. That was at the time primarily a Drupal shop. Tandem is not primarily a Drupal shop, but it's still primarily in PHP, although we do some Node stuff as well. Yeah, I mean, so as a consequence, the vast majority of Lando users are in the PHP space and specifically in the Drupal space. The breakdown is at this point, when we started, it was almost like 95%, Drupal users, probably 99% PHP projects. At this point, those numbers have gone down quite a bit. So I think at this point, it's probably about half of our users use it exclusively for Drupal, and about 75% of them use it for just PHP projects. So that would be like WordPress, Laravel, Joomla, for the Joomla fans out there on the internet.
The one Joomla fan.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. I mean, I think fan could be accurate too. Not to hate on Joomla too much, but it's just so fun and so easy. Yeah, and the other 25% is a weird mix. I think Node is probably the biggest second segment. A lot of that is used for decoupled PHP projects, so sort of hard to determine what's the primary thing there. And then yeah, we've got there's interesting use cases that I think we're seeing now. So we have a couple of people who are using it for .NET projects. We've Python users, some Ruby on Rails users. But in totality, there's about 12,000 people who use it every month, active monthly users, which is very exciting, and that growth seems to be accelerating, not decreasing. So exciting times. We certainly didn't anticipate having that many users when we decided, hey, this could be a cool side project to work on for a while. So yeah.
And then at some point it turned into a product, right? Instead of a cool little project.
I think product implies that somebody pays money for it. So
okay.
So no.
Okay. All right.
I was going to call it a Swiss Army knife of that was how I was thinking about it in my head, but.
Yeah, we certainly, it is a free and open source project. So that's how we would describe it. We definitely conceptualize it more as like a general purpose development tool as opposed to exclusively a local development tool, although that is probably the way that most people use it. But I think there's some interesting things, particularly like this year and next year, that are going to be happening where you might not be using it locally anymore. You might be using it in other contexts. So those are some exciting things that are happening.
It's a perfect segue to my next question. What does the roadmap look like for 2021 for Lando?
Yeah, sure. So last year we had our first sort of stable release. We had been in beta for a long time, but we're sort of like Google-ish believers in the beta. So it was a pretty stable beta for a long time. But we went official last year, and we have a decent amount of users, so we had a good. I think we were able to just take a step back and see how people were using it, what are the pain points, and those kinds of things. Just get some data on that. We certainly have our own personal opinions about what the problems are. And earlier or later last year, we decided that it was time to make a new version of Lando. So this year there'll be a new major version of Lando. I think it's going to be very exciting. We think that it's going to be significantly better than what we already have. And in more specific terms, I think that we're going to fix some of the larger pain points that I think people are having with Lando. And also plan to make it a lot easier for people to sort of develop their own sort of Lando plugins, which is something that you can do now, but it is unless you have deep knowledge of the insides, is sort of tricky. So I think those are some things that are going to be happening this year that we're pretty excited about.
It appears you guys are on a regular release schedule now. Is that right?
If it's regular, it's happenstance regular.
Okay.
So I'll say yes because it'll sound good. But yeah, Lando is still. it's free and open source. It is still primarily volunteer driven. So it is. We get to it when we get to it. We try to keep it as regular as possible. But Tandem is a digital agency. It's not a open source.
Right.
Development company. So client work happens. We do client work. I think if there are serious bugs that happen or that are discovered or upstream breaking changes that happen with Lando, we do try to jump on those as fast as possible to fix them so we can cut releases that improve those. But at this point, it's pretty stable. I think we've done a good job providing some resiliency to the upstream breaks that have happened probably more like a year or two ago. So yeah, sometimes it's regular, sometimes we go for a while without any releases.
Where have been your biggest pain points in the upstream?
I think for a long time it was Lando made a strategic decision early on to not really maintain its own images. I think that's one of the reasons why we've been able to do so much, because maintaining images is difficult.
Right.
But the trade-off that you make there is that you're sort of at the mercy of changes in those images. So one of the biggest things that we had run into is there would be an upstream break in one of those images. Lando would pull that break down and then things would break. But we developed a system to just pin to the images so that we can have some sort of stability. It provides more stability, but we have to do more maintenance on our end because we have to now manually sort of update those pinned versions, which is a little bit of a pain. But I think that's it's not a huge burden for us. And if that's going to not have things break for everybody, obviously that's a pretty good trade-off. So that's where most of the pain points come from. Not recently, but in the past, we connect to Pantheon and Platform and some other people we'll be connecting to in the future. And like, they manage their own things. So sometimes when they make changes, they're not thinking, oh, well, Lando needs it to be this way for X, and then it breaks. And that could be a source of pain as well. But we've got pretty good communication channels with all the people we integrate with at this point. So, we try to, there's some mitigation that happens just because of that communication. And if there are problems, there's good reactive, like, hey man, you messed this up. Like, can you fix it real quick sort of thing? So usually it's not too bad at this point.
So there is one, I think, kind of really big pain point that most users are probably aware of. And it's not something that you can directly manage, I think. And that's that Docker, which Lando builds on top of, runs poorly on Macs. I was wondering if you could maybe give people listening to the show a little bit of information on maybe why that happens and anything that they can do to mitigate that.
Yeah, I mean, this is always the biggest question, not for us, but for anyone who's building anything on top of Docker and has to use Docker for Mac. And the underlying issue is that, Docker itself requires the Linux kernel. This is not available on Mac. So the solution to be able to run Docker on Mac is to have a small virtual machine on your computer. So when you're running Docker for Mac, you actually have a virtual machine running. Yeah, it's a very small, lightweight one, but it is one. So if you've used like VirtualBox or VMware, it's a lightweight version of that. So you've got a small Linux computer running, and that's where all the Docker magic is happening. So that solves the problem of having the Linux kernel on your Mac, but it introduces a whole bunch of other things that have to happen. And the big thing is, how do you share files between your host computer, your Mac, and this VM? And this is a challenge. This has been a challenge going back to pre-Docker days. If you'd ever run a Drupal site using, I think, just like VirtualBox and Vagrant without NFS, it gets very slow in that situation as well. So this is just a hard problem to solve. And on Mac, the file sharing implementation is the worst. So that's why it's the slowest. And especially for a project like a Drupal project, where you have lots and lots of dependencies, lots and lots of files, like you get to the bleeding edge of what's acceptable, I think, pretty quickly. There are some ways that you can mitigate. I mean, so Docker is working on the problem. Now that they're more of a development tools company, I think they're more interested in solving the problem. TBD, it's a hard problem. So they've made some changes. Last year, they introduced some new techniques to try to mitigate them, including this mutagen sync thing. We had actually gone down that road before and like had sort of realized like, yeah, this is great, but it introduces a whole bunch of other problems that people are going to be upset about. So like that's basically where they ended up. They took it out. They're not going to use it anymore. They're trying something else now. So I think Docker's doing their part to try to solve that issue. Also, the new M1 Macs are significantly better performance-wise. So I'm running on one right now. We've been experimenting with like what that looks like. Just having that helps file sharing quite a bit. So like more hardware is helpful. That's always a good way to solve the problem. Just like get a better machine. Obviously, that's not going to be like a super accessible solution to everybody. Like I can't just say, hey, like if you want to like run Lando on your Mac, just gotta spend $2,500 and get a new Mac and you'll be good. Like not a long-term solution, but like that's going to help a bunch of people too. And then on the Lando side, like there are some things that you can do to mitigate the issue. We have a volume exclusion mechanism that you can use that basically says like, hey, I don't need to share, my vendor directory, my node modules directory. So just don't share those. If you can do that, and you don't need to touch those files for like code editing wise, that can actually boost your performance by quite a bit. So that's the main thing that we ask users to do on the Lando side to mitigate the performance issue. But what we've seen is that like a lot of people are switching to just Linux to deal with the problem. And surprisingly, like Windows is like the fastest growing segment for Lando users right now. Like the Mac usage is, it's still going up because Lando generally is going up growth-wise, but its growth has slowed and Windows has taken over. And that's because a lot of people are using WSL2 now, including people at Tandem. That Windows is their main development environment now, and they're using WSL2. The performance on Lando is very good, and they've been happy with that. So like that's a trend that I did not anticipate.
Can you briefly describe what WSL2 is for our listeners, and maybe after that, tell us what percentage the three different platforms kind of have?
Yeah, sure. So I don't have a ton of Windows experience. I've tried to like avoid it generally since since Windows ME, which is I think it was like the late 90s. Thank you for the shout out, Stephen, on the Windows ME. WSL stands for I think Windows Subsystem for Linux, and what it is basically Ubuntu running inside of Windows. So for all intents and purposes, like you're getting the Lando experience that you would get on Linux. There's some additional setup that's required, but I think we have a guide for it. A lot of people have figured it out. There's certainly GitHub issues to walk you through it. We're going to make that a first-class citizen in probably the new version of Lando that we have.
Interesting.
But like a lot of people have switched to it. It makes Lando quite a bit faster because, if you're just running inside of Linux to begin with, then you avoid the file sharing problem completely because there's no VM. You're just in the machine that you need.
Right.
So. And then the breakdown, it's still predominantly Mac users, which probably is not a huge surprise. The Drupal community is mostly Mac, and I think the PHP development community is mostly Mac. The last time I checked, I think it was probably like 60% Mac, which was down a little bit as a total share. It was, I think, at its peak, it was maybe 90%. That was like maybe 2 years ago. I think it's like down to like 60%. Windows and Linux have definitely taken up more space. So it's still Linux second and then Windows third. So I think it's like 60, I want to say 60, probably 25, 15 is the breakdown. Mac, Linux, Windows.
You had talked about the Mac with the M1 chip. Are there any plans for an ARM version in the future?
I mean, there's part of me that wants to say no because I have an M1 Mac now, and I guess that means that I would just not have to work anymore. Yeah, I mean, there'll be ARM support. We're working on that right now. One of the things that I think we're going to do is, for the next version of Lando is the next major version of Lando, not like the next release that we do, is to rebase all of our core Lando services on like the on core Docker images. Right now we have like half Docker images and half Bitnami images. All the Docker images are like ARM ready out of the box. Right. So if we build better tools around those images, then we'll have ARM support and we'll actually probably just have a better experience overall. So I think that's the plan. And I would guess that there's probably something that people can try out in the next like 2 months would be my guess. That's when we're planning to have an alpha version of the new Lando, like I guess Lando 4 is what it would be, or Lando 2 depending on how you count, I guess. So yeah, ARM definitely, like it's going to be a requirement, I think, for us to support that. I mean, like I got my M1, I think like maybe 2 weeks ago, and I don't know, I think they did a pretty good job. I mean, like it is significantly faster than the Intel Mac that I have, significantly less power drain. I mean, like I played like now that we're in pandemic mode, I've been playing Civilization 6 with my buddies online every now and then. And like when we get into the chat room, they have like old Windows machines, and like my thing's ready to go in 30 seconds. Then I'm waiting like 5 minutes for them to like actually get into it. So it's like very fast. They did a good job.
Do you have the Air or do you have the Mac Mini?
I got the MacBook Pro, so I got like
Pro. There was a Pro that came out with an M1. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So I just got the. I mean, it's what I've done basically every 2 years for the last 8 years. I just like find the new MacBook Pro, like top off all of the RAM and all of the CPU, and then just buy whatever that is.
Right.
So Acquia recently announced end of life for Dev Desktop, which a lot of people are using.
End of an era.
A lot of people that hosted with Acquia use that. And in their announcement, I think they mentioned Lando as an alternative. Were you involved in that process at all? Did they notify you? Is that news to you? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so we've had a long relationship of talking to Acquia about trying to do a long time ago Calabox integration, and then after that Lando integration. Right. And recently Matthew Grasmick has been chatting with us for the last like few months about these plans and these changes. And right now, like, yeah, we have like tentative agreement to like do a Lando integration with Acquia. which will be exciting. We've wanted to do that for a long time.
It will be similar to like the Pantheon integration kind of thing?
Yep. Yeah. So right now, Lando integrates with Pantheon and Platform.sh and Amazy. We have like tentative agreements now to do Acquia and WordPress VIP. I know that this is a Drupal podcast, but WordPress VIP, which is like automatics, like with the WordPress.com like managed hosting platform, and probably Contigix, formerly Blackmesh, or now Blackmesh again, I guess.
Yeah, right.
So. I mean, better name, obviously.
Everything old is new again, don't you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Black Mesh was like sort of. I didn't really understand what it meant, but like I certainly don't understand what Contigix means. It sounds like is this a? I think it's like something that I could get to resolve some unspecified medical condition. So I feel like Black Mesh is probably a better name. So good for them on that. So we're planning to do those three. We're very excited about the Acquia one. We're like basically in like let's make sure that the legal part of this is good. And once we're good there, then I think like we're gonna start doing that. So very exciting about the Acquia one.
So they made the announcement before it was inked.
Yeah, so I guess that's reason to believe that it's gonna happen.
Okay.
I think, otherwise I think we'll both look stupid.
Yeah.
So we don't anticipate there being a problem. We haven't officially signed it, and gotta wait till the ink's on the paper before you say it with full confidence. But say what you will about Dev Desktop. I mean, it was a great. It and MAMP are still great solutions for people who are just getting used to Drupal. So I know we all talk crap about Dev Desktop, but it did a good job for what it could do, I think.
Hey, speaking of other tools, I'm curious about maybe the similarities and differences between you and some of the other tools in your space, like DDev. Like, what do you think is like a close competitor to you, and what are the key differences?
Yeah, so I mean, we don't really consider DDev or Doxel to really be competitors. There's certainly a lot of overlap. It's hard to deny that. We really look at Vagrant as like the big competitor. I mean, like Lando is really trying to like be the tool that you can run for all your projects in the same way that Vagrant was. And it's more about connecting things together than like, here's a tool that's for Drupal and a few other things, or here's a tool that like connects to my hosting service, right? So, but I mean, like, I think the two that people talk about the most, I think, are Doxel and DDev. To me, Lando and Doxel are sort of completely different tools. I mean, Doxel is like a very like lightweight wrapper around Docker Compose. If Leonid or Sean hear me say this incorrectly, please like yell at me at Twitter that I've like characterized your thing incorrectly, obviously. But I think more or less like that's like, if you like Docker Compose is hard to do. If you want some like power tools to make it easier, then Doxel is good. It has a lot of the same features as Lando, I think, to some degree, just a little bit of a different experience, different model. DDev is probably closer to Lando in many ways, but I think there's some core differences there. I mean, like obviously DDev is built for, DDev comes out of the DDev Live platform. So there is like that baked in sort of like, we also have a hosting platform and this is a paid company that's making this thing. Lando is like free and open source. So I think those are pretty significant differences in terms of like where we're coming from, who we're trying to address. But we don't, I mean, like, again, we don't consider them competitors. We think that they're like, they do similar things, but they're not actually targeted towards the same audiences. And me and Randy Fay have like been on the circuit talking about this for like years. So I feel like he's like one of my buddies now. So it's just like sometimes it's very often like new Docker stuff will come out and Randy's the first person that I go to like, hey, how are you guys like addressing this? And he's like, how are you addressing it? We chat about it. So it's I think it's much more collaborative, than it is competitive. I think we're just happy to get people off of like, off of VirtualBox and onto like containers. So like for us, that's the meta win. If we all can do that successfully, then we're all gonna win.
So as Lando is closer to a Vagrant virtual machine kind of configuration, and I use that as well, at what point do you think that someone should be using a virtual machine instead of Lando? Where is that point that it makes more sense to go virtual machine, do you think?
I mean, I don't think there's any reason to really do it. I mean, I mean, in my mind, containers are significantly better than a virtual machine. You know, the only reason in my mind why you would use a virtual machine is if you really just can't. And this is sort of different. I mean, virtual machine for like your entire development environment, as opposed to like on a per project basis, is to deal with the file sharing on Mac.
Right.
So like, but if you're going to move to a virtual machine, you might as well just get a Linux laptop. I mean, that would be the easiest thing to do, I think. So, but yeah, in my mind, containers are vastly superior. Even with the performance problem, you know, I think the only real reason why you would ever use a virtual machine is if all your projects are exactly the same, which is like decreasingly the case. You know, like even like, you know, having one version of PHP in your virtual machine, like, you know, if you can guarantee that all your projects will be on one version of PHP, if you can guarantee that all your projects will just use one version of Maria and one version of Elasticsearch and one version of Node, and you or you like think that Node NVM and RVM and PVM and all the VM, you know, version management switching tools is a good experience, then like, yeah, you can totally do that. But I think that's like 5 years ago, I think you could get away with that. I think like if you're a professional developer, like working on like significant projects, this is just like not the world we live in anymore.
One of the things that's always been, you know, I'm a developer, obviously, and, you know, I use Lando as kind of my development environment, you know, for a lot of the reasons you've said. You know, it makes it easy to switch versions between things, have something unique for one project. One of the things that I'm curious about is how do you develop, Lando's kind of like a meta development project because it's a project for developers, right? So I'm curious, how do you, you know, what's it built in? How do you develop for it? How do you test it? You know, what does that look like?
Yeah, so Lando is a Node.js project behind, like, that's the technology that we use. I know a lot of people who make like DevOps tools use Go. I think like like DDev uses Go, for example, and Docker is written in Go. I think like from purely a technology standpoint, like Go is probably the thing you would want to use. We chose Node, one, because like when we started doing this, Go wasn't really a thing. But when we had a chance to like switch, we decided to like continue to do Node. And I think the main reason for that is like JavaScript is sort of, if there is a universal language, JavaScript is probably the closest thing. And we have a free and open source tool, and we'd like to have contributors. And we felt like if it were written in Go, we would have less contributors. If it's written in JavaScript, you know, JavaScript is a language that basically like Ruby developers will know, and like PHP developers will, like everyone will know it. So that was like the main reason why we decided to continue doing it in Node. And I think that's probably not going to change for that reason.
Everyone will know it and no one will like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd like to dig down a little bit in, you know, in testing. Like, do you just install beta versions when you're or like development versions when you're testing it, or do you have a VM with it installed so you can run tests? I'm a little curious about like the meta around these types of testing.
Yeah, so there's like probably three interesting buckets to talk about when it comes to just like developing and testing and building Lando. And the first is just like the development environment to run Lando. So like you can do Lando in Lando, which like we did because we thought that we were clever for a little bit, but it's actually pretty stupid to do that. It's only interesting just to say that you've done it and to give some meta-ness to it, but ultimately it's like not very practical. So generally we have this there's two big projects that have come out of Lando that I think are actually pretty valuable. And I know that I think Amazy actually has adopted one of the frameworks for some of their testing as well. But we have two projects that are also Star Wars themed. One is called Hyperdrive and one is called Leia. And Hyperdrive will set up a development environment for you for Lando. But like the development environment is not very sophisticated, which is nice because it's just, you need Node, the right version of Node, and that's basically it. So that's like the only that's the only other tool I have on my computer besides Lando itself. So I have Lando and I have Node. So that's like what we use for development. And then for testing, we developed this project called Leia. And what it does is it translates comments in README files into functional tests. So what I mean by that is if you look in the examples folder in the Lando repo, you'll see quite a few examples of how you can do different projects. So I think there's like 25 or 30 different folders in there. Each one of them has a README, and you can Lando start all of those projects. And in each one of those READMEs, you'll see, it depends on the sophistication and complexity of each one of the examples, but there'll be a list, there'll be a code block that has a bunch of different commands in it. And the comment will describe what the command does. And every time we build a version of Lando, all of those commands are run on all of those examples. And there's like hundreds and hundreds of them. And what these do is they verify basically that the examples work. So that's the main functional testing that we do for Lando.
Okay.
And this is nice because obviously, like if you change something deep, you can see, oh, I broke like this example and this example. That's helpful. But it's also nice for some like sort of research on like upstream changes too. So every now and then it's like, oh, well, this example stopped working. Why is that? Oh, because like this image updated, or like, oh, because Composer 2 is now the default, not Composer 1, and that causes problems. So it also provides some level of just like, we run them every night. So like every morning I'll come in and, oh, all the tests passed last night. Oh, that's good. There's no like upstream changes that we know of that I can anticipate. So I think that testing framework, being able to just like put commands inside of a README file instead of having to learning some language like Bahat, which is like a great language, but like there's a learning curve there. There's some complexity in writing those tests. Being able to just like write bash commands with comments in them, this has enabled us to like test things really quickly. Anyone can write those tests. It's very easy. And I think this is one of the reasons why our project has like gotten stable and remained stable, for as long as it has. And by stable, I mean like with the understanding that like Lando is emulating all of the development things that you need. So like this is like a tall order. This is not like it does one thing and like that's stable and it will never break. It's like it does a lot of stuff. So the fact that it works more often than not, most of the time, I think is a pretty incredible feat.
I have one. So you mentioned a little bit earlier something that I think is curious. You mentioned that the only thing you have installed on your machine is Lando, Docker, obviously, and Node. And I'm curious about that because I'm the same way. The only things I have installed on my machine are Lando, Docker, and Node, and of course NPM and NVM. The only thing I've found difficult to get working in Lando is like a direct React project that doesn't use the mean stack. Like it doesn't use Mongo, it doesn't use any of that stuff. It's just NPM, and I think it uses Express underneath. Is there a reason why that's a little bit more complex, or am I just misunderstanding documentation? Because I've tried a couple of times to get rid of that dependency personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to know without seeing exactly like what you're describing. I mean, setting up a node service, I guess, is a little bit more complicated than a PHP service, because it's like PHP. It's just like, tell me where the web root is, what version you need, and I'm good.
Yep.
Node is a little bit more complicated because it's like, okay, well, like Express is a good example, right? Because it's like, okay, like you're basically setting up, you're configuring the web server at the same time. So it's just like, okay, what ports do I need? Do I need certificates to install them? How do I map those like out to the outside? Do I want to use something like browser sync? How do I connect that? So there's just more complexity. But we run, the only reason why I have Node on my computer is to develop Lando itself. We use Lando for like, so a good example is like almost all of our documentation are ViewPress sites. Okay. And we use Lando to run the ViewPress sites. So like, I think there's like a ViewPress dev command. Like ViewPress has like got its own CLI. It's like ViewPress dev. So like we make a node service, we like define the ports, and we just run, I think, yarn start, which runs ViewPress dev, and that's all we do to get that running. And then it automatically refreshes when you change the code and that sort of thing. So there's like a browser sync watch task sort of built into it.
So this question was leading into something that I think a bit of a gap in our notes, and that is the community. There is a community around Lando. So people that are looking for either for help or to help out or get started, where would you recommend that they start?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of documentation, so I think that's always the first place to go. Lando or docs.lando.dev. There's a lot of documentation in there. The examples folder that I mentioned earlier is a great place to go. So for example, like struggling with Node, like there's a bunch of Node examples in there that you can check out that might be helpful if the documentation isn't doing it for you. And then if you're interested in like engaging with us or with other users, we do have a Slack channel, as everyone does. I would say it's fairly active. There's about 1,500 people in it. All the Lando maintainers are in it. We try to help out when we can. Obviously, we're not like doing that all day long, but there's like a bunch of people in there who are I would say Lando power users who can help you get running and will help answer your questions as well. And if you go to the docs.lando.dev, I think there's a link in there to get to the Slack channel as well to sign up to it.
So we've established early on that Lando is not a product, right? Nobody's paying to use Lando. It is truly an open source project. But just wondering, is the development of Lando funded in any way? Either by donations or companies that have funded development of specific features?
Yeah, I mean, so at this point, if all things go well, Platform, Pantheon, Acquia, Amazy, Contigix, WordPress VIP will all be paying Tandem money. However, 95% of those dollars will be geared towards making the integrations for them, and only a small percentage of that money, in the best case scenario, will go back to Lando for Lando proper. We'd like to increase the share of that because like the integration, if Lando doesn't work, the integrations are sort of stupid to begin with. So like you got to invest in the core product. We all know this. Drupal has basically the same sort of model, right? Where you gotta be investing in Drupal. Otherwise, like it's going to be hard to like, do professional services around something that's like buggy or not working. So like that is some funding that we have for Lando proper. We also, you can sponsor Lando. So if you go to github.com/Lando, there's a sponsor button. You can sponsor the project. I think we have about 200 people who are sponsoring Lando currently, and some companies and agencies. So credit to them for doing so. But all those things taken into consideration, I would say like only about 10% of the at cost work. So like not even just being able to pay people some money. Is what's covered currently to like do Lando development. So it is still by far and away vastly volunteer time to do this.
And if somebody is interested in volunteering, where do you guys need help, and how would they go about reaching out to show interest?
Yeah, in the documentation, there's a whole section on contribution. So I would go there. You can also just like join the Slack channel, and like all of the maintainers are in there. There's a contributors channel if you'd like to join that. So I'd encourage you to join the Slack channel and just ping me or one of the other maintainers, or go into that contributors channel and ping somebody there. And, you could definitely start to get to work on stuff. We are starting development on a new major version of Lando, which I think like is a daunting task, but I think does provide like a good entry point for new contributors, because like it's on a blank canvas, but it is sort of paint by numbers. So like if you want to be number 7 red, like there's an opportunity to do that now, to carve out a niche for yourself in this new version of Lando. Maintaining this
Okay.
one of the reasons why we want to make a new version of Lando is like it's difficult to contribute to the current version of Lando. It's a very complicated piece of software, and I think that was a necessity to sort of get it to where it is as fast as possible, which is like, that's always a consideration when you're on volunteer time. But in this new version, like making it, trying to separate things out a little bit better and make it easier to contribute. That's like one of the major goals. So if you're interested in contributing now would be a very good time to get involved.
Hey, if you have any questions or feedback about this show or any other shows, you could always reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You could also engage with us on the Talking Drupal channel on Drupal Slack. That would be hashtag Talking Drupal. You could always email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can always get show updates by signing up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support's greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron by going to talkingdrupal.com and choosing Become a Patron right on the right rail there.
And I'd like to thank you, Mike, for joining us. This has been a great discussion. Is there anything that we missed, anything our listeners should know about Lando? Do you have a timeline for the new version of Lando? Do you anything else you'd like to plug?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage everyone to sponsor Lando. I mean, you guys just did your sponsorship plea, so I feel like we can go back to back on the sponsors. Yeah, I mean, sponsorships are like definitely very good. We've put in a lot of time and effort into Lando. People seem to like it, so and get a lot of value out of it. So pay some of that value back to Lando so we continue to improve it. Like this is a good deal, So certainly encourage you to like do that. Yeah, I mean, we are. I think that we're looking to do a like alpha release of the new version of Lando in the next few months. We are very, very excited about it. I think the plans that we have for this version are going to be like an order of magnitude better than what we currently have. So we're very, very excited about it. We think that
Cool.
it's going to be very cool, I think. So we're very excited to start working on it.
So I'm taking a look at the sponsorship page, and I just signed up myself. So I encourage other people to do so, but it's $4 a month for the single sponsorship. It's the lowest tier, but I mean, it contributes to the total amount. And if you think about how much you use Lando as part of your day-to-day development life, $4 a month is really nothing. And I say that because $4 a month isn't necessarily nothing for everyone, but anyone who's a professional developer that is using Lando to build their projects on, to contribute $4 a month seems like an easy ask to me.
If Lando saves you, like net saves you 1 hour, like a year, which it does, by the way.
Yeah.
Then like we are asking for you to return a very small percentage of that value to us, so that we can continue to make it even better for you.
Exactly.
So this is like a good deal. So I would highly encourage everyone to sponsor. Again, $4 a month. This is not a lot of money. For this is like a good return on investment, shall we say?
Yeah.
If I know that you're a Lando user and you do not sponsor it, when we all get back together for Drupal events, I will at least ask you to buy me a beer.
There you go.
And hopefully not a lot of you do that at the same time. I feel like once we get past 6, it might be a huge problem. So
it's like an adverse. That's like an adverse sponsorship. Like, hey, here's 20 beers.
Yeah. I mean, like the beer sponsorship just doesn't scale as well as the dollar sponsorship, because there's only one person that I'm a small man. I can only drink so much beer, So I mean, I'll give it my best shot.
You're
but
sponsoring the next bug found in Lando.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And so, Mike, if our listeners wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way they can get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, join the Slack channel. I'm on the Slack channel. I'm happy to chat with anyone. You can also email me, Mike at lando.dev. So those are the best ways to get in touch with me. But I'm fairly around, like in the Drupal Slack universe. So like I'm sure you could find me if you want to.
And Stephen, where can our listeners reach out to you?
StephenCross.com. Best way to go.
And John?
You can find me on all social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi, and you can find out about Oomph at oomphinc.com.
How about you,
And
Nick?
you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN. And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.